And now we have Mano Mannaz. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Ah, fantastic. Wow, can't believe it. Manu has been in Glastonbury since 1993, researching all the amazing stories of Glastonbury Abbey, and she is presenting all her discoveries for the last God knows how many years. I won't go into detail. You still only look about 35.
That's that Libra in you.
It's a charmer. Yeah, so she's going to share about the Holy Grail and the story of Goddess Arimathea and the connections with the Holy Grail. So please give it up for Mano.
Thank you. I'll just say a little bit about the video that's playing before we stop it and start the PowerPoint. It was made by Jem Holter with his drone, and we went out a few days ago, and the levels, some of you might be aware of, some of it's so flooded with all the rain, and we wanted to get maybe just a sense of how the Isle of Avalon might have looked, because we're going back about 2,000 years with this talk. So yeah, just that sense of water and slightly raised land, an island sticking up above it, and a beautiful light. And yeah, it was just amazing. So yeah, could you, yeah, we'll swap over on. I'm not techie, so huge apologies. I'm not struggling, but I'm gonna have to keep going with it. Okay. Okay. So when I began to prepare for this talk a few months ago, I thought I knew where I was going. But as many of you will know, Glastonbury is Glastonbury, and you have to just go with the flow. We will be exploring nearly 2,000 years of history in a small...
Make sure you're speaking into the mic.
Yeah. We will be exploring nearly 2,000 years of history in a small Somerset town. And we have to start somewhere. So let's start here. This beautiful stained glass window in St John's Church, Glastonbury, illustrates a key moment in one of the local legends. It shows Joseph of Arimathea bringing the Sangreal to the safety of Avalon a few years after the crucifixion of Christ. After arriving, Joseph and his companions constructed a simple church made from wood and clay daub. Somehow, the original construction of the first church survived for over 1,000 years, its framework being repaired and protected as and when needed. And the illustration is actually from an old postcard from about 120 years ago, an artist's impression of the first church built from wood, wattle and daub. Some historical context. Joseph and his group came to Avalon partly to escape persecution by the Roman Empire. Britain had been conquered in 43 AD, but for a time the southwest of England was relatively safe because it was at the fringes of Roman occupation. There are no records of this period, but there are some archaeological finds which suggest that the area around the site of the first church did have some kind of settlement in the 1st century, and these are some pottery fragments which can be seen in the Abbey Museum, and they came from excavations in the Abbey ruins. In time, Joseph's first church grew into a community of Culdees, who were the early Celtic Christian hermit monks. The illustration is an artist's impression of what this early community might have looked like, with a central building which was the first church, and then smaller huts around it, which each of the monks would have been living in. The occupation of Britain by the Roman army ended in the early 5th century, and this meant that the Celtic Christian communities could expand and prosper. Communal living was important because it supported the study and the copying of scriptures. And the town of Llantwit Major in South Wales, records of this kind of communal living have survived, and these help us understand this period. In the late 5th century, Llantwit Major had become a Celtic Christian school, and many studied there. These students included St David and St Samson, as well as the historian Gildas and the Welsh king Melkin of Gwynedd. So this is one of the really ancient Celtic Christian crosses in Llantwit Major.
We just pause if we're not getting the connection to the laptop. Sorry.
Okay.
Right, sorry, we've moved the laptop onto the stage and we've got signal for the live stream, so we just have to pause for a second. 10 seconds.
Okay.
Anybody know the jokes? Sorry. I don't know root jokes. Doctor. Doctor, I can't sleep. The alarm sign is the bed will soon go.
Nice. Are we ready to roll?
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're ready to go.
Thank you.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. In the late 5th century, St Patrick was said to have come to Glastonbury. Here he reorganised the local culdees, persuading them to live together in a monastic settlement rather than separately as hermit monks. This enabled Glastonbury to become, like Llantwit Major, an important centre for teaching Celtic Christianity. And this is a photo of a carving of St Patrick, and it's in the Abbey Museum. In Glastonbury, there are no records for this period, but we know that the original structure of the first church survived for over 1,000 years. We also know that in the 10th century, the first church was known as the Ilde Kirche, the Old Church, because it was understood to be of ancient construction. In the 12th century, the historian William of Malmesbury was very impressed when he saw the old church, writing in his history of the Abbey, "The church at Glastonbury is the oldest that I know of in England. In it are preserved the bodily remains of many saints. It is said to be a heavenly shrine on earth." With the understanding that there had been 400 years of occupation by the Roman Empire, it's easy to see why the graves of some of Avalon's very early Christians were forgotten. In 1191, King Arthur's grave was famously found near the old church, but the location of another important tomb, that of St. Joseph, had been overlooked. This sad state of affairs began to change when a Druid bard called Melkin recorded a prophecy which explained exactly where Joseph had been buried. Melkin was probably a 6th century Welsh king called Melkin of Gwynedd, the Druid bard who had studied at the school in Llantwit Major. Melkin spoke about Joseph's forgotten tomb in the ancient graveyard close to the first church. He lies next to the south corner of an oratory fashioned of wattles. Melkin was saying that Joseph had been buried very close to the first church, in the area which is now the site of the Lady Chapel in the Abbey. And that's the photograph at the bottom, which I'm sure many of you will be very familiar with. Melkin also said that inside Joseph's tomb there were two vessels or cruets. In his sarcophagus, two cruets, white and silver, filled with the blood and sweat of the prophet Jesus. In the photo, for comparison, these bottles are made from a silvery type of ancient glass, which dates from the 1st century. So it is possible that the two cruets described by Melkin may have looked a bit like this. Two cruets filled with the blood and sweat of the prophet Jesus. Local legends speak about St. Joseph bringing the Holy Grail to Glastonbury, but this is usually symbolised as a cup, and there's no mention of two cruets containing holy blood. However, the relics described by Melkin must have been important if they'd been buried with Joseph inside his tomb. Was it possible that the two cruets were somehow connected with the later legends of the Holy Grail? Quest on. We are clearly on a modern-day Grail quest, which is about asking questions and getting answers. So let's ask some and see where it gets us. What happened with Melkin's prophecy? Did anyone look for Joseph's tomb? Was it found? Were the two cruets found inside it? Was this one of the Abbey's secrets? What happened with Melkin's prophecy? Melkin's prophecy seems to have been forgotten for about 800 years. This changed in 1342 when John of Glastonbury wrote a chronicle about the Abbey. John included a direct quote from Melkin in his chronicle, and this, of course, had the effect of bringing attention to something which had been forgotten for centuries. This photo is of medieval stained glass window in All Saints' Church in Langport, showing St. Joseph pointing to the two cruets underneath his cloak. Did anyone look for Joseph's tomb? In the mid-1300s, any legend connected with the Holy Grail and King Arthur was of great interest. The Knights Templar had inspired the age of chivalry, and the Crusades had reunited the idea of pilgrimage as a way of getting closer to God. As we will see later, when Melkin's prophecy was made public, it caused a stir. It also raised some serious political issues, especially for the Church of Rome. The reality of the first church being founded in Glastonbury rather than in Rome was supported by both local legends and ancient documentation. However, these sources of information were a sore point with the Catholic Church. This photo was one of the ancient Gnostic Christian manuscripts that have been found in the last century or so. When King Arthur's grave was found in 1191, the Glastonbury monks were accused of capitalising on the hundreds of pilgrims coming to visit his tomb, so a search for St. Joseph's grave would easily have been another chance to mock. And yes, it's easy to get lost in provincial medieval politics. So for the purpose of this quest, let's look again at the larger historical context. And the photo there is the sign in Glastonbury Abbey, which marks the tomb of King Arthur where it was found originally in 1191. With this in mind, I'm going to leave the mid-1300s for a while and ask some questions about the Abbey's cult of St. Joseph to see where that leads us. In the late 1400s, there was a huge revival in interest in St. Joseph and the founding of the first church. In response, Abbot Richard Beer decided to build a new and much larger St. Joseph Chapel for pilgrims to visit. And this is the St. Joseph Chapel as it is today, in the crypt below the Lady Chapel. As an enthusiastic architect, diplomat and scholar, Abbot Beer was a man of many skills. He was also the kind of man who wanted to leave a legacy. The result is that, even after 500 years, there are a number of buildings locally which, in one way or another, are directly connected with him. And this is the main door of St Benedict's Church, which had been built by Abbot Beer in the early 1500s. The Great Fire. The original wooden structure of the first church had been tragically burnt to the ground in the Great Fire of 1184. However, a few years later, the Lady Chapel was built on exactly the same piece of land as the St Joseph's first church, because everyone knew that this plot really was holy earth. Abbot Beer understood very well that he was building his new chapel in the same place where Joseph had built the first church almost 1500 years earlier. But Beer's decision to create the new chapel directly below the Lady Chapel was both dangerous and costly, because it meant digging out a huge amount of earth right beneath the existing building, without the whole structure collapsing in the process. Nevertheless, Beer succeeded, and the new chapel and the crypt opened in about 1500. The photo is again of an old postcard from about 120 years ago of the crypt before the renovation started, because the abbey ruins 120 years ago were in a great state of decay. But it gives you a sense just of that whole sense of space there, the crypts underneath the Lady Chapel. The new St Joseph Chapel quickly became a popular focus of pilgrimage. It was also used for the private ceremonies connected with the monks who were members of the inner circle of the St Joseph cult. For this purpose, a complex system of underground tunnels was created. This meant that the chapel and the crypt was secretly connected with other buildings outside of the abbey walls. This in itself suggests that there was something unusual going on which needed to be kept hidden. Abbot Beer probably knew more about the abbey's secrets than anyone else, and he was a prominent member of the St Joseph cult. In addition, he seemed to enjoy leaving cryptic clues in stained glass windows and stone carvings. Luckily for us, some of these clues have survived, and this means that their symbolism can be decoded. And this is a photo of Abbot Beer's initials and mitre hat carved above a door of St Benedict's Church. This window in St John's Church dates from the time of the Abbey, and it was almost certainly designed by Abbot Beer. The shield is directly associated with the Abbey's St Joseph cult, and its complex symbolism was intended to convey a message. Above the green cross on the two cruets, there is a brown book positioned sub rosa, directly underneath a red rose. The Latin words sub rosa mean under the sign of the rose. It is a legal term for a meeting which needs to be kept secret or private. Since the time of ancient Egypt, the rose has been a symbol of love as well as of secrecy, especially in connection with affairs of the heart. Rose symbolism was also associated with the fingers to the lips gesture, which means shush or keep quiet. Why is secrecy connected with rose symbolism? In an ancient Greek legend, Venus Aphrodite, the goddess of love, gave a rose to her son, Cupid Eros. Cupid then passed the rose to Harpocrates, the god of silence and secrets. This was Cupid's way of asking Harpocrates to keep quiet about his mother's numerous love affairs. In the Tudor period, if a rose was suspended from the ceiling of a council chamber, it was a sign informing members of the meeting that they were sworn to secrecy about whatever was being discussed. And this photo at the bottom is a Tudor rose roof boss, which again can be seen in the Abbey Museum, which is an indication that at least some part of the Abbey buildings, they were using the Tudor rose, but also in this sense of it being above in the ceiling, you're underneath the rose if you were in that room. Had Abbot Beer intentionally placed the book beneath the rose as a way of saying that the Abbey's cult had information of some kind that needed to be kept sub rosa, a secret? There are some more clues in this window in St. Benedict's Church. St. Joseph is shown holding a book underneath his left arm, and there's a flowering branch of the holy thorn tree in his right hand. Again, there is the symbolism of the book, which supports the message that there had been some kind of important information connected with St. Joseph. We're now going to start looking for some more clues in the local legends. The local legends tell us that Joseph of Arimathea had been a rich tin merchant and an uncle of Jesus. Joseph's business was in trading tin ore from the mines in Cornwall, and this meant that he sailed regularly between the Holy Land and the southwest of England. The local legends also tell us that when Jesus was a teenager, Joseph brought his nephew to visit the Cornish tin mines and the Isle of Avalon as part of a business trip. Then, in the years that followed the crucifixion, Joseph had returned to the Isle of Avalon with the Holy Grail. When Joseph arrived, he planted his wooden staff on Wiriel Hill, and this sprouted to grow into the Glastonbury Holy Thorn tree. The Glastonbury Holy Thorn is not the native British hawthorn, which flowers only once in the month of May. Instead, uniquely, the Holy Thorn flowers twice a year, at Easter and again at Christmas. So the photo is of the Holy Thorn doing its Christmas flowering in December 2022. The Holy Thorn flowers twice because it's a species of tree native to the Mediterranean. This means that the Glastonbury Holy Thorn is a form of living confirmation of the legend that Joseph had come from the Holy Land to the ancient Isle of Avalon. And these are some photos I took just a couple of days ago. The Holy Thorn outside St. John's Church. It's just coming into its Easter flowering now as we're right in the middle of Easter. Quite amazing. It still amazes me each year, doesn't it? The final part of the local legend is that St. Joseph had buried the Holy Grail below the Tor near a spring. This transformed the water so that all who drank from it were promised eternal youth. This spring is now called Chalice Well, and it can be visited today. The water is naturally rich in iron minerals, and this gives it healing properties. And this is a photo of the wellhead at the spring equinox celebration earlier in March this year. Some more clues. Sometimes comparing legendary events with information from other texts, such as the Bible or Gospels, can help sort out fact from fiction. For example, after the discovery of the Nag Hammadi Gnostic Library in 1945, we now have uncensored original versions of some of the New Testament Gospels. This has opened up a much more constructive debate about the life and time of the very early followers of Jesus. Another way of gaining better understanding of medieval symbolism is to look at what a word meant when it first came into use, because this can change over time. For example, the word legend comes from an old French word, légende, meaning a narrative dealing with a happening or event. And the word legend was first used in the early 1300s to describe writings about the lives of the early Christian saints. Louis Charpentier offers a valuable insight into the original meaning of the word legend in his book, The Mysteries of Chartres Cathedral. A legend is created with the object of handing something on to those who have the key to its understanding, but sometimes the key is lost and only the legend remains. And this is a photo of a window and it shows St. Martha with two large silver keys hanging down from her belt. It's in St. Benedict's Church. In the Middle Ages, there was a resurgence in curiosity about lost or forgotten knowledge, and this fascination resulted in the popularity of the Arthurian Grail romances. These legends began to be written down in the late 1100s, when interest in the beliefs of the Knights Templar, the Cathars, and the troubadours of France was also growing rapidly, especially in the royal courts of Europe. So if we look again at the Glastonbury legends with these understandings, we'll see where that gets us. The Glastonbury Arthurian Grail romances were first written down in the late 1100s. And they speak of Joseph Arimathea bringing the Holy Grail to Glastonbury. And this was made particularly popular by a French poet called Robert de Boron. Robert de Boron's Joseph d'Arimathea combines information from several source documents, some of which have now been lost. One of these source documents was probably the Gospel of Nicodemus, which was not included in the Bible, but became very popular. It was translated into many languages, including Occitan, which is the ancient language of the Languedoc, the area of southern France associated with both Mary Magdalene and the Cathars. And this is a stained glass window, medieval, showing Mary Magdalene holding a book. It's in the Church of All Saints in Alford, which is near Glastonbury, a few miles away. So again, there's a whole story. We haven't got time to go there today. There's a whole story, and what on earth is a medieval stained glass window of Mary Magdalene with a book? Why is that in Alford? Robert de Boron's Grail romance highlights the connection between the Holy Grail, the events of the Last Supper, and the crucifixion. At the Last Supper, Jesus had filled a cup with wine before blessing it. Jesus then asked the disciples to share the cup around the table. Then he took the cup, gave thanks, and gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." That comes from the Gospel of Matthew. The ceremony of the new covenant was a vital part of the Last Supper, the sacrament which is now called Holy Communion or Eucharist. This sacrament is important because it speaks about sins being forgiven through having faith and trust in a higher spiritual power, which in this case is represented by believing in Jesus. And this is a detail of the painting of the Last Supper, which is in Chiltern Priory near Glastonbury. Boron's legend expands on the spiritual significance of the Last Supper by including a sequence of events which is not found in the Bible. The mystical side of these events is also revealed. From de Boron, we learn that the cup that had been blessed by Jesus at the Last Supper would later become the sacred relic known as the Holy Grail. From the Bible, the Gospel of Nicodemus, and de Boron, we learn that Joseph of Arimathea had played a very important role at the crucifixion. As the uncle of Jesus, Joseph took responsibility for taking the body of Jesus down from the cross. Joseph was helped in this by Nicodemus. The two men then carried the body of Jesus to a tomb owned by Joseph for burial. And this is just an illustration of the crucifixion, another window from St. John's Church, showing Mary Magdalene at the foot of the cross. In the process of taking Jesus down from the cross, there had been a great flow of blood from his body. St. Joseph had the presence of mind to use the cup from the Last Supper to capture or collect this sacred blood. And this is another stained glass from St. John's, showing this process of Joseph taking Jesus down from the cross. We discover why there was so much blood coming from the body of Jesus in the Gospel of St. John. One of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out. John is speaking about the wound made by Longinus, the Roman soldier overseeing the crucifixion. Longinus had used his spear to stab Jesus while he was still on the cross. In the 1930s, owning this lance of Longinus, or the Spear of Destiny, became an obsession for Adolf Hitler. Joseph had a vision of Jesus. From de Boron, we learn that in the days that followed the crucifixion, Jesus appeared to Joseph in a powerful spiritual vision. Mary Magdalene had had a similar visionary experience on the day of resurrection. The spiritual significance of Mary's vision is explained in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And again, there's another stained glass window from St. John's. So it's showing Mary Magdalene encountering Jesus in the vision. Joseph describes his vision of Jesus in the Gospel of Nicodemus. I was standing in prayer in the middle of the night, and the house was surrounded by 4 angels. I saw Jesus as the brightness of the sun and fell down upon the earth for fear. But Jesus, laying hold of my hand, lifted me up from the ground. Then dew was sprinkled upon me. But Jesus, wiping my face, kissed me and said to me, "Fear not, Joseph, look upon me, for it is I." De Boron tells us more about Joseph's vision, adding information about what had happened on the spiritual level when Jesus had appeared. In the vision, Jesus tells Joseph about the spiritual significance of the sacrament of the new covenant. Jesus also gives Joseph prayers which were to be used in this sacred ritual. Boron's Holy Grail is something both mystical and physical. It's a sacred relic which also has spiritual teachings connected with it. The holy words, which are sweet and precious and full of grace and pity, are rightly named the secrets of the Grail. And that's a quote from Robert de Boron's Joseph d'Arimathea. De Boron's romance tells us why the physical Holy Grail, as a sacred relic, was so special. It was the cup blessed by Jesus at the Last Supper. It was the cup used by Joseph at the crucifixion to collect the sangreal, the blood of Jesus. It was the symbol of the new covenant, which is the healing and forgiveness of sins through the power of unconditional love. This medieval stained glass, this is the one in Langport Church, All Saints Langport. And above St. Joseph's head, there are 2 golden hearts, intertwined and balanced with each other. Is this a message, a way of saying that Joseph brought the Grail teachings with him when he founded the first church? here in Glastonbury. A heart of gold. Gold has been used since ancient times to represent purity, wealth, and nobility. The two hearts, golden hearts above St. Joseph's head, are in the position of the soul star chakra. Connecting with pure or unconditional love of the soul balances all the masculine and feminine qualities within ourselves. And when this inner balance is achieved, there is a feeling of love, peace, and harmony on all levels. What happens if we look at the shield of the Abbey's cult with the key of these understandings? The symbol of the brown book underneath the red rose could well have been Abbot Beer's way of saying that Joseph had brought the secrets of the Grail with him when he came to Avalon. On the shield, below the arms of the green living cross of the Holy Thorn, there are two golden cruets described in Melkin's Prophecy. Melkin was writing in the 6th century, long before the term Holy Grail had come into use. Nevertheless, Melkin's Cruets and Joseph's cup of the Last Supper had the same function, which was to hold or contain the blood of Jesus, which was collected at the crucifixion. Was Joseph's tomb found? Well, this is where things get very confusing for complex political reasons. Simply put, Glastonbury seems to have desired the honour of being known as the site of the first church, but this was not what the Church of Rome wanted. And this is the stone tomb that's thought to have been in the Abbey's St. Joseph's Chapel, which was down in the crypt. We now know that the Church of Rome were masters of the political cover-up, doing everything possible to muddy waters and conceal truths that did not fit with their need to control the narrative. We just have to look at what they did to Mary Magdalene to see how devious and persistent they could be with this tactic. And this is a detail of a painting in St. John's Church. It's Mary Magdalene, and it's by Conrad Witz, dates from the mid-1430s probably. And again, there's not time to go into it here, but there's huge political messages going on in this painting. In the time of Abbot Beer, the late 1400s and the early 1500s, the outcome of a search for St. Joseph's tomb was probably a very hot potato. Almost certainly by then, this was the kind of information that had to be hushed up and kept quiet, the kind of secret that needed to be kept under the sign of the rose. The growth of the Abbey's cult seemed to be at the heart of discovering more. So, with this in mind, I decided to make a timeline for the cult's development. Some of these events are well documented, which adds weight to the discussion. Other information is circumstantial, but it's interesting. I've had to simplify and condense this information because it's a long, complex political story which evolved over several centuries. However, if anybody wants to know more about this, I can recommend this website by Edward Watson, classmed in blogspot.co.uk. Yes, up on the screen, yeah. The photo is another example of the cult shield carved in stone on the outer wall of the Abbey's St. Patrick's Chapel. Again, this chapel of another building built by Abbot Beer. Timeline: the search for St. Joseph's tomb. 1. In about 1200, Robert de Boron, wrote a Grail romance about Joseph of Arimathea arriving in Avalon with the Holy Grail. In about 1342, the 6th century Prophecy of Melkin was recorded in John Glastonbury's Chronicle, and it recorded the location of St. Joseph's ancient tomb. In 1345, a man from London called John Bloom had a spiritual vision in which he received instructions to search for Joseph's tomb in Glastonbury. Bloom wrote to the king, Edward III, asking for royal approval. On June the 10th, 1345, Bloom was granted permission for the search, and this document was signed by the king. In 1367, a Lincolnshire monk named Arthur Boston wrote an entry in his chronicle reporting that St. Joseph's tomb had been found. The bodies of Joseph of Arimathea and his companions were found in Glastonbury. It seems that Joseph's tomb had been found, and the news had travelled at least as far as East Anglia. In 1382, in Glastonbury, Abbot John Chinnock restored a small chapel in the abbey, dedicating it to St. Joseph and St. Michael. This meant that there was a chapel in the abbey which was specifically devoted to the cult of Joseph of Arimathea. In March 1417, the same Abbot Chinnock went to the Council of Constance in southern Germany, where he responded to a theological attack with the statement, "The greater antiquity of faith was proved by the fact that Joseph of Arimathea himself had come to England with 12 companions, and the saint was buried in Glastonbury." This was the time of the Great Western Schism, when there was a huge internal conflict within the Church of Rome. In this period, 2 or sometimes 3 popes were rivaling to be head pontiff. I did wonder whether Abbot Chinnock was thinking to throw his abbot's hat into the ring along with the others. Again, we'll never know. In 1500, Abbot Bere constructed the new Joseph Chapel in the crypt below the Abbey's Lady Chapel, and there was a stone tomb inside this chapel, which was rumoured to contain a silver casket holding the relics of St. Joseph. Abbot Bere's new chapel soon became a focus for pilgrims. There is a cluster of significant events in the mid to late 1300s which seems significant to me, but please, draw your own conclusions. 1342, John of Glastonbury quoted Melkin's prophecy in his chronicle. 1345, John Bloom in London was granted royal approval for a search for St. Joseph's tomb in Glastonbury. 1367, in Lincolnshire, Arthur Boston wrote an entry in his chronicle reporting that St. Joseph's tomb had been found in Glastonbury. 1382, in Glastonbury, Abbot Chinnock dedicated a chapel to St. Joseph for pilgrims to visit. So where does that get us? We will never know for sure if the original ancient tomb of St. Joseph was found, but the timeline certainly suggests that possibility, and more importantly, many believed it was found. In the late 1300s, this news might have been wonderful, but by the early 1500s, things had changed dramatically because of the Protestant Revolution, which was sweeping across Europe. With hindsight, some of the political turmoil during the reign of King Henry VIII in England might make more sense if the discovery of Joseph's tomb is factored into the equation. Henry VIII famously wanted a divorce from his wife, Catherine of Aragon, but the Pope in Rome would not grant it. So, as a way of getting around the stalemate, Parliament passed the Act of Supremacy in 1534. This made Henry VIII the supreme head of the Church of England. And the illustration is, I'm sure you'll be all familiar with it, it's the Tudor rose, the red and white Tudor rose. This formal, legal, complete break of religious ties with Rome was a big deal. And Henry must have had a lot of courage to make such a momentous decision. Did he have this kind of courage because he knew for certain that Rome was not the legitimate heir to the Christian faith? Had Henry, perhaps, seen physical proof that St. Joseph really had brought the Holy Grail to Glastonbury? Sub Rosa again. It seems that the phrase, under the sign of the rose, was first used in England in a state paper signed by Henry VIII in 1546. Is this a clue that the king knew at least something about the powerful secrets guarded by the inner circle of the cult of Joseph of Arimathea? After the dissolution of the monasteries in 1539, St. Joseph's stone tomb remained down in the abbey's crypt. In 1662, it was quietly rescued and moved to St. John's Church because of fear of being damaged by the Puritans in the Reformation. So this tomb can now be seen in the churchyard behind St. John's Church. What happened to the contents of Joseph's tomb? After the dissolution of the monasteries in 1539, there was a rumour about what had happened to St. Joseph's relics. They said the body was hidden most carefully, either at Glastonbury or on a hill near Montacute called Hampden Hill. And this was a quote from a document by William Good. And he'd been a former altar boy at Glastonbury Abbey before the dissolution. If a legend had endured for centuries, it is enduring for a reason. The local legends speak of the Holy Grail being buried in crystal caves deep beneath the Tor. These caves are real and could be physically accessed until about 100 years ago. A sacred relic holding the spiritual frequencies of the Christos Magdalena Grail codes, activated and amplified by natural crystals, buried, safe, deep, beneath Glastonbury Tor. These frequencies of unconditional love would have a profound effect on Avalon's earth mysteries and the local dragon lines. Divine energy codes in the heart chakra of Mother Earth, flowing continuously through the sacred waters of the Chalice Well and the White Spring. These would also flow out energetically to everyone with the visionary or psychic gifts to perceive them. I will end with the hope that I have shown how the Glastonbury legends are living legends in the sense that they carry an inspirational spiritual legacy. Also, as living legends, they are holding keys and codes to working with the Grail quest in Avalon's sacred landscape. I also hope that, if you choose to quest for these keys and codes, that you will have great success. There's a photo taken in the beginning of February this year. I was just sitting in meditation at the wellhead. Unknown to me, there was a gentleman at the side taking photographs. And about half an hour later, we were all sitting around the bonfire at Chalice Well, the in-bulk ceremony. And this man came up to me and said, "Oh, do you want to see this?" He showed me his camera. and this is what had come out on his camera, this arc of rainbow light over the wellhead. So yes, I mean, I could feel the energy when I was sitting there, but it was lovely to have that confirmation from him of the light that was appearing in the camera. So yeah, I've got to end somewhere, so it's going to be there for time constraints and all the rest. I am. I can't. Oh no, I have to stay here and see you all as a dim thing. I've left you all stupefied. It's been quite a journey the last few months really putting this together. So I hinted at in the introduction. I had an idea a few months ago about what I wanted to talk about, but I let myself be guided with all the twists and turns. And the last few weeks, I've been shocked at what I've been called to put together. So I'm not surprised that it might be a bit shocking. But that's the information. It's up to everyone to put it into the context with their free will of how you take it and what you do with it.
Well, there's a book coming up.
I've got to get on that, the next thing.
Yeah, please.
I've had to leave out so much information, but hopefully some of that will go in a book form, yeah. Okay.
Question here.
Oh.
Hi. What do you make of the, we talk about the Grail, the search of the Grail, but what about Tudor Pole's finding of the Blue Bowl?
That is another whole epic, as I'm sure you're aware, I'm sure a lot of other people are. Yeah, to me it's part of this Grail mythos. Have you read all Tudor Pole's writing about it?
Some of them, yes.
Some of it. Have you read the bit where, as far as I understand it, he seems to be saying that he'd seen the Blue Bowl in a vision, and in the vision he'd seen the Blue Bowl at the Last Supper. Are you aware of that? Yeah. Yeah. To me that feels truth. But I also feel, well, I've been told by my guides for years to keep quiet about the Blue Bowl, because it is such an amazing sacred relic. So that's where I come from with the Blue Bowl.
We have another question, Peter first. Yeah, another question, Peter. Yeah, go for it.
Over here.
Oh, there.
There is this big debate, of course, is whether the Grail is, the Holy Cup, or else whether it's actually the womb of the Magdalene, or else whether the Grail is inside all of us. Does it have to be? Is it an either-or thing? Can't it be all three?
To me, it's not an either-or thing, and it never will be. No. It's such a multifaceted thing, and you're right. I mean,
It can be all three.
It's all three. Again, a few months ago, the guidance was coming through. Like the way I receive guidance in this format is my guides say, just look at it this way and see where you get. So the guidance was to look at the Grail as one or more physical relics, one or more set of teachings, and one or more bloodline lineages that are all connected together. And it's very interesting you said about the idea of the womb and the grail within the womb. I don't know, 30, 35 years ago in the meditation, I had a vision that, again, I was starting to ask on some level about the grail. And I was shown it in my womb area as a huge golden cup energetically. But again, that didn't make much sense years ago, but now I've got a bit more understanding of the spiritual significance of that. So yes, it's so multifaceted symbol, but I think that's part of its beauty, because it can be what it is to everyone in the way that they need it at the time. Yeah.
There's a question over here.
Yes, thanks.
Hi.
Enjoyed your talk very much, thank you.
Thank you.
I was just in St Ben's Church the other day and I noticed that lovely stained glass window
Oh,
of Joseph.
the one of St Ben, in St Ben?
St Ben's.
St.
Benedict's. St Benedict's.
Yes, so I'm not quite hearing you. St Benedict's,
Joseph
yeah.
of Arimathea and
Yes.
the staff flowering from
Yes.
the tree.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, if the church is showing him with the staff flowering, is that sort of an embrace, of feeling comfortable with the legend? You know, is the church saying we support that? Or how old would that window be?
Again, I haven't got time to explain just for time reasons, but I did all I could to include medieval stained glass, because that was from the time of the Abbey. And you're right, that other one in St Ben's is much later. It's probably late Victorian. And the other one of St Martha, and all the other stained glass in St Ben's and St John's is that late Victorian, early 20th century time. I'm guessing, I haven't rigorously studied this. But what I'm understanding is the local Masons, Freemasons, and I know now they've got huge bad press, whatever, go back 120 years or so. The only thing that makes sense to me in looking at all these stained glass windows, and each time I look at them, I see more and more details, which is like, whoa. Or enough of them understood it. Whoever was, in my understanding, whoever was actually designing stained glass in that time would have been a Freemason, would have had access to this lineage of teachings that we've been talking about, coming down, quietly kept, quietly passed on. And they were informed by those legends. The other person I haven't had time to touch on at all, unfortunately, is Frederick Bligh Bond in the early, again, 20th century, and he was a Freemason. That's been a whole part of carrying this lineage of teachings down through its centuries, quietly passed on, but left for us to see as information in plain sight. So once I realised it, I'm sure you're doing it, you get your eye in and you start going, oh, why is that like that? Why is that like that? And then this is where it all starts, joining dots. Okay.
Also, Reverend Lionel Lewis, check him out, because he was a vicar in the early 1900s, and he wrote a very good book about the saints of Glastonbury, talking about all of the saints that are still considered myths and legends. Check him out. That'll probably answer your question as well. Sue, we got a question.
Yeah.
The text there, you had Joseph of Arimathea and his 12 companions. Is there any indication of who those companions may have been?
Oh, there is, but I've got
the sort of memory that doesn't remember things like that. But you can go back to Malmesbury. I'm guessing Abbot Chinnock was quoting from Malmesbury, because there's a huge amount of complex detail in Malmesbury's history of the Abbey, where all that is actually embedded into it. And then, as Tor's mentioned, there's been all sorts of other very learned people, including Lionel Smith.
Reverend Lionel
Reverend
Lewis, yeah.
Yeah, so particularly in the 1900s through to the 1930s and beyond, there were a whole group of mostly men, but doesn't matter, who were deeply interested in this, had access to all these documents, understood Latin, because they were connected with the church or whatever. Again, Latin, back in those days, you learned it at school. So they were studying all this in the same way that we are now. So they were writing books, and there were so many books about all these legends, and they were pulling on the documents that were then, or still are around. The main early one is Malmesbury's Antiquities of Glastonbury Abbey, which you can get a translation from the Latin of now. Okay.
One more question, anybody? No? Well, thank you very much, Mano.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, did you see? Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Sorry, I was looking over that way. Sorry, Steve. Yeah, go for it.
Just to add something, you a picture of the Last Supper from the Priory.
Yeah.
Underneath it, there's a Latin saying, and if you look into the picture, you see they're having a bit of a drink. They're all showing love, care, and affection to each other. They're all actually like looking into each other's eyes. They're embracing each other. There's a whole kind of scenario going on that's sort of within the painting.
Yeah.
And underneath it actually says, "So this may continue."
Right.
Sort of add that to it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to stick my neck out. I was very lucky a couple of years ago. I had two friends who were actually physically living at Chiltern Priory for a bit, so I was able to go there, take some photographs, have a really good look at it. My intuition is, but it's based on a bit of study of Catherine Maltwood, who was the inspiration of the whole Glastonbury Zodiac. And I noticed that the way the figures are drawn in that painting, they look like Catherine's Maltwood style to me. I've got a feeling it could well have been painted by Catherine Maltwood. She was deeply connected with all this that was happening at that time, up to the 1920s, the whole Avalonian thing it's huge. So I feel that painting, as you beautifully pointed out, it's just so gentle, it's so soft, it's so loving, would have been inspired by her understandings of the secret of Glastonbury's secret, the secrets of the Grail, all that we've been sharing a little bit about. Does that answer your question? Oh, okay. Yeah.
So this may continue on over the last time.
Yeah. Again,
I'm taking it as more supporting evidence that this tradition was being carried on quietly all the way down through the centuries, but re-emerged very, very strongly sort of 120 years ago. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much,
Okay.
Mano. Yeah, let's hear it from Mano.
Thank you.